Bo Burnham's latest special, Inside, is really heavy. It's a lonely, theatrical summation of our generation's biggest fears and anxieties about the present and the near future at our door. Made of equal parts hilarious, musical, and downward spiral into dissociated depression. I definitely would advise waiting to watch it if you're going through any kind of mental distress right now. Judging by early online reaction, it seems to have had a strong effect on most viewers, leaving them feeling hopeless and/or detached from the world around them. I can definitely see why. It's certainly intended as a deeply personal experiment in looking closely at the pain of isolation, a downward spiral spurred on by the mourning of a future we all lost in 2020. As personal as this show is, it still rings true to most anyone who made it through the past year and change. Due to the nature of our current global predicament, isolation and loss are pretty universal experiences right now. It's very much a product of our time. Bo spends much of the special pointing at the hyperreality of our world in small fragments. Hyperreality is a fun, sci-fi sounding word that refers to a postmodern philosophical theory. Look, I majored in English and studied this stuff, and it's still a bit hard to wrap my head around sometimes, so don't feel bad if this makes no sense. Put simply, hyperreality describes the feeling when reality is indistinguishable from fiction and/or the symbols that represent reality. It's identifying the world through a bunch of abstract ideas that effectively detach us from the origin of that which is being symbolized. It makes real things impossible to connect to emotionally or even recognize. A kind of cultural dissociation, I guess. I'd quote Baudrillard, but my Norton anthology is currently propping up a window in my apartment, so enough theory. What Bo is doing throughout a lot of his most recent special is picking out the little hyperreal symbols we all recognize and lining them up side by side. It's especially obvious in his song That Funny Feeling.
A gift shop at the gun range, a mass shooting at the mall.
Up close and juxtaposed, these hyperreal cultural moments appear entirely absurd, yet also an undeniably accurate representation of our world. All of it feels so overwhelmingly unreal and undeniably real at the same time. All at once, Bo is rushing us with the darkness that we've been coerced to consent to. I get that it's sad. Having all that pointed out at once is overwhelming and troubling. I know it's sad, but I really appreciate how effectively he's able to shake me out of my hyperreal detachment by arranging it all into a beautiful piece of art. He took a world and experience that detaches us from emotion and arranged it all in a way that made a lot of us viewers complete emotional wrecks. In a world that makes us largely apathetic, it's powerful to see art turn that world into something emotionally resonant. I like when good art makes me feel strongly, so this special makes me happy. I can't shake that funny feeling, that happy feeling, whenever I think about Bo Burnham's Inside. I'm not happy to see Bo suffer, or at least perform suffering, extremely convincingly. Because even if this is a performance, it's certainly a very real depiction of a suffering that is being felt by a lot of us simultaneously around the world. That suffering does not make me happy. What makes me happy is how perfectly Bo blurs the line between his own real life and the performance he's putting on. There it is, that funny feeling, that hyperreal feeling. The personal struggles depicted here are like the micro versions of the larger societal struggles that we're all going through, whether we're aware of it or not. The blending of what's real and unreal, the absurdity of it all. Ultimately, I don't think it matters if Bo's performance here is genuine or put on, because it still evokes the same feeling whether it's real or not. Of course, not everything in this special blurs the line between reality and fiction. Some of this is undeniably performance, and it's just as enthralling. Bo pulls off a lot of impressive theatrics within a single room, armed with nothing but a mic, a wide-angle lens, and an elaborate lighting kit. From the opening moment when he reveals the light on his head and the disco ball its beams are bouncing off of, I knew I was in for some raw creative innovation. Despite the confines of his space, Bo manages to cover just about everything in the world and reach the heights and depths of human emotion. It all fills the four walls until they're bursting at the seams. It makes me so happy to see an artist accomplish so much entirely on their own and within very strict limitations, and somehow still conveying a powerful sense of scale and importance. All of us film nerds and indie filmmakers dream of making the so-called one-room movie. To come up with some brilliant idea that makes a cheap set and a tiny crew tell a compelling story that moves an audience. Stuff like Richard Linklater's Tape or even Kev Smith's Clerks. Now, obviously, Bo isn't exactly low budget or indie, what with the Netflix deal and high-end production gear. Nonetheless, he's limited by a lack of stage and crew. A one-man show, he's embraced the limits of isolation and made something resonant. That type of creativity makes me excited. Sometimes the artists we look up to seem so out of reach in terms of their resources and abilities, so seeing Bo still bring it, in spite of his limits, makes me feel like I've done something right by spending this year plus inside making stuff in my room. I'm not making masterpieces like Bo, but hey, maybe I'm on the right track, and that makes me happy. Inside feels like watching an artist at his peak, which is always a pleasure to see. His music writing is better than ever, both in terms of composition and lyrics. He's still got that poppy jingle feel that he's always had, but the words hit harder and the rhyme schemes are strong as hell, especially in songs like Welcome to the Internet. There's moments here that feel like musical theater Father John Misty, and I love that. The jokes here are more absurd than anything Bo's done before, and he pulls it off so well. There were definitely moments where I didn't know if I should laugh or hold my breath, and that just made me want to laugh harder. Bo's direction and framing is beautiful, making a tiny apartment feel like it contains the whole world at times, and at others it's as suffocating as a coffin. And it's helped largely by his use of color and mise-en-scène. And when it all falls apart, or the seams are visible, it doesn't pull me out of the show. In fact, it pulls me in even further to see Bo's little world fall apart, like a microcosm for the state of the world outside. It's also just incredibly relatable to see that just outside of his perfect shot is a massive pile of cables and stands. That's exactly what my room looked like when I shot a short film in a tiny room last year. I've always been a huge fan of movies about making movies, but this one is almost unlike anything I've seen before. We're seeing the story behind a much smaller production, one that's done entirely in a single apartment. That's a lot more relatable to a small creator like myself. There's something to be said about the moments when Bo embraces the small content creator aesthetic in this piece. It's very much the reality of most of the media that our generation absorbs, and I just love to see it depicted honestly for Netflix's massive audience. On top of that, its style echoes some of the indie film movements that have been growing steam in the past year or so. Bo is far from the only creator who spent his time inside making beautiful movies. Creators like Dan Lotz and Joel Haver, among many others, have been working hard as hell making great feature films for the past few years and releasing them in their entirety on YouTube. Definitely check out Joel Haver's film Island and Dan Lotz's film Sheep Theater if you want more of this bedroom filmmaking type of feel. So yeah, Bo Burnham's Inside is a really heavy show. The pain throughout it is one that a lot of my generation can relate to strongly, and it's communicated here better than I've seen before. We're all trapped inside right now. But I'm so happy that this piece of art exists to express that collective pain in a beautiful and funny way that still feels very personal. It makes me happy to see art that expresses something universal in a way that resonates with a lot of us. I especially appreciate the moments when Bo reminds us of how deeply absurd it all can feel. I don't know why, but the absurdity is oddly freeing. We all try so hard to make sense of everything, and sometimes making sense of it is its own trap. Freedom from sense feels like such a pure form of freedom, and I'm happy that this special exists and reminds me of that. It's just very creatively liberating to watch. Like there's still new ways to express ourselves as artists. It makes me want to pull out my camera and point it at myself and make something that feels true to me in this moment of time. I'm excited to see the work that this inspires, and I'm excited to watch this over and over again. I'd be super excited if I could listen to this on Spotify as individual tracks, but for some reason I can't. Anyways, I'm just rambling now. I like the special a lot, and I felt like I had to write about it. Thank you to my generous Patreon producers, Caleb Mayer and Greta Harris, for helping me feel like my ramblings have a place on this platform.